a security guard at a film industry event in Century City, put his hand on Keanu Reeves's collar and told him to turn around and walk back out the door he came in through. Not because he had caused a scene, not because he was making trouble, because the guard had decided, in the 4 seconds since the man in the dark jacket had stepped off the elevator, that he did not belong in the room. The lobby had 43 people in it. Every one of them stopped. Nobody said a word. What happened in the next 90 seconds is the part of this story that nobody who was there has ever been able to describe the same way twice. Because it was the kind of thing that happened so rarely and so quietly that the people watching it are not entirely sure afterward that they saw what they think they saw. There is a building on Avenue of the Stars in Century City, California, called the Meridian Tower. 38 floors, glass and dark steel. The kind of building that exists to be a backdrop for the industry it houses. Talent agencies, production companies, entertainment law firms. The particular ecosystem of organizations that orbit the studios without belonging to them. The lobby is high-ceilinged and deliberate. Pale travertine floors, a reception desk in dark walnut, security stations on either side of the elevator bank with brushed steel barriers, and a sign-in system that had been updated twice in 5 years because the building's management took the question of access seriously. The event was on the 31st floor. A private industry gathering, a quarterly meeting of a film finance consortium that had been convening at the Meridian Tower for 9 years, always in the same conference space, always with the same caterer, always with the same quiet understanding that the people in the room were there to do business, and the people not in the room were not invited. The guest list was managed by an assistant named Claire, who had been doing this particular job for 3 years and who knew, better than most, the difference between a last-minute addition and a mistake. Keanu Reeves had been added to the list 4 days before the event, through a production company whose principals were attending. His name was in the system. Claire had entered it herself on a Tuesday afternoon. He arrived at 6:47 on a Thursday evening. Dark jacket over a black shirt. Dark trousers. The kind of clothes that are not trying to say anything. He had come from somewhere else. The jacket carried the particular settled-in look of a jacket that has been on for several hours, and he had not stopped to change. Because there was no particular reason to change for an event like this, which was not a gala or a premiere, but a meeting of people who worked for a living and knew it. He took the elevator to the 31st floor. He stepped off, and Marcus Webb stepped in front of him. Marcus Webb had been working private event security for 11 years. Before that, 4 years in the California Highway Patrol, and 3 years before that in the Army, in a role that had required him to be large and present and authoritative in spaces where large and present and authoritative was exactly what the situation called for. He was 41 years old and 6'3" and carried himself with the economy of movement of someone who has learned that stillness is its own kind of force. He had worked the Meridian Tower's 31st floor 6 or 7 times before. He knew the space. He knew the kind of events that were held there and the kind of people who attended them. What Marcus Webb knew about people was this: he could read them. He believed this. And it was largely true. In 11 years of event security, he had de-escalated situations that had the shape of problems before they became problems. Had identified the person in a crowded room who was going to be difficult before that person had done anything difficult. Had learned to trust the combination of body language and clothing and movement that told him, with high enough accuracy, whether someone was where they were supposed to be. He was a good security professional. He was also on the question of who belonged in rooms like the one on the 31st floor of the Meridian Tower, operating with an assumption he had never examined closely enough to know that it was an assumption. He had grown up in Carson, 11 miles south of where he was now standing. His father was a longshoreman at the Port of Los Angeles who had worked the same terminal for 26 years and who had never, in those 26 years, been invited into the buildings that the cargo in his cranes eventually reached. He had worked outside. He had been paid for working outside. He had come home tired in a specific way that Marcus recognized before he was old enough to name it, the tired of a man who has spent his day in a world that has already decided what his role in it is going to be. Marcus had decided, at 17, that he was going to be the one doing the deciding. Not in a way he could have articulated then, or could fully articulate now. Just a private understanding that there were rooms and there were people who belonged in them, and he was going to be the one who knew the difference and acted accordingly. This understanding had served him well in most of the situations his career had presented. It did not serve him on the evening of Thursday, the 5th of November, at 6:47, on the 31st floor of the Meridian Tower. He saw the man step off the elevator. Dark jacket. Unhurried, moving toward the conference space the way someone moves when they know where they are going, he stepped in front of him. He said, "Sir, this is a private event. I'm going to need to see your credentials." The man stopped. He looked at Marcus. He was not alarmed. He was not defensive. He had the quality, Marcus noticed it even then, even in the moment, of someone who has been asked unexpected questions before and has learned to answer them calmly. He said, "My name should be on the list. I was added Tuesday." Marcus said, "The list is at the desk downstairs. I came up from the lobby. They had me sign in. That's the building list. I have a separate list for this event. You should have been given a pass." A beat. "I wasn't given a pass." Marcus looked at him. He looked at the jacket, the black shirt, the dark trousers that were not quite the trousers of the people who had been arriving for the past 40 minutes. He made a calculation in approximately 3 seconds that he would spend a long time afterward wishing he had taken longer to make. He put his hand on the man's collar. Not roughly, not with violence. The particular practiced firmness of a security professional redirecting someone, a grip on the jacket near the shoulder, a slight backward pressure, the unmistakable physical communication that the conversation was over and the direction of travel was going to be back toward the elevator. He said, "I'm going to have to ask you to go back downstairs and sort it out at the desk." The lobby behind them had gone completely quiet. 43 people. Not one of them spoke. The man did not resist the grip. He did not raise his voice. He did not say anything for a moment that stretched long enough to become something other than a pause. Then, very quietly, he said, "Could you take your hand off my jacket?" Not a question, not a demand, just the plain, level statement of what he needed, delivered in a tone that had no heat in it and no fear in it, and precisely as much weight as the situation required. Marcus Webb took his hand off the jacket. He did not know, later, exactly why he did it in that moment. He had removed his hand from people's jackets before, under instruction or at the direction of a superior or when a situation had resolved. He had not, in 11 years, removed his hand simply because a person asked him to, in that particular tone of voice. But he did it. And in the 3 seconds that followed, before anything else happened, he understood something about the situation that he had not understood 30 seconds earlier, though he could not yet have said what it was. A woman named Patricia Morse was standing 12 feet away. She was 63 years old, a senior partner at an entertainment law firm on the 28th floor who had been attending this event for 7 of its 9 years. She had watched the entire exchange. She had watched Marcus Webb put his hand on the man's collar. She had watched the man's stillness. She had watched Marcus take his hand back. She walked over. she said to Marcus, not unkindly. "Do you know who this is?" Marcus looked at the man, at the dark jacket, the black shirt. He said he did not. Patricia Morse said the name. Marcus Webb did not visibly react. He had the training not to visibly react, but something moved through him in the 3 seconds after he heard the name. Not embarrassment, exactly, though embarrassment was part of it. Something closer to the sensation of a floor that you thought was solid, briefly registering that it is not entirely solid. He said to the man, "Sir, I owe you an apology. I made an error in judgment. I'm sorry." He said it directly, without hedging, without explaining the mistake away. The man looked at him for a moment. He said, "Thank you. That's appreciated." "Then, what's your name?" Marcus told him. He said, "Marcus. Is there a list issue that needs to get sorted, or am I cleared to go in?" Marcus said, "You're cleared. I'll verify with the desk, but you're cleared. Please go ahead." He said, "Thank you." He walked past Marcus Webb and into the conference room. The lobby, after a moment, resumed the sound of itself. Marcus Webb stood near the elevator bank for 4 minutes after that, doing his job, watching the last few arrivals come through, performing the functions of his position with a steady competence that had sustained 11 years of a career. Inside, he was working through something. He was not working through the embarrassment of having been wrong about a specific person. That was real, and it was there. But it was the smaller part of what was happening. The larger part was the question he kept arriving at from different directions, each time he approached it, and each time he found it waiting. How many times had he made that same calculation about the same category of person and been wrong in the same direction? And nobody had known a name to say. He thought about his father at the port, coming home tired, the particular tired. He thought about the 3 seconds it had taken him to put his hand on someone's collar, the jacket, the shirt, the trousers that were not quite the trousers of the people who had been arriving for the past 40 minutes. He thought about the 43 people who had gone completely silent. He had been in rooms where things happened that made people go silent. He knew what that silence felt like. He knew the difference between the silence of shock and the silence of witness. The silence of people who have watched something that is not entirely right and are waiting to see what happens next. This had been the second kind. He finished his shift at 10:15. He drove home to Inglewood. He sat in his car in the driveway for a while before going inside. His wife, a woman named Sandra, who had been with him for 14 years and who had, over those 14 years, developed an accurate read of the silences he brought home from difficult nights, asked him how it went. He told her. She listened. She did not say the thing that would have made it easier, because she knew, after 14 years, that the easier thing was not always the thing that helped. She said, "What are you going to do about it?" He said, "I don't know yet." She said, "When you figure it out, tell me." He figured it out over the next 3 weeks. Marcus Webb had, since his 3rd year in the business, been affiliated with a professional association for licensed security professionals in Southern California, an organization called the Western Private Security Council that ran certification programs, quarterly seminars, and an annual conference that drew between 300 and 400 working professionals from across the region. He had attended the annual conference 4 times. He had presented once, 3 years ago, on de-escalation techniques in high-density event environments. The presentation had been well received. He contacted the organization's program director in the last week of November. He said he wanted to propose a session for the following year's conference. He said the session would be about assumptions, specifically, the assumptions that security professionals make about who belongs in a space, how those assumptions are formed, and what the professional and human cost of applying them incorrectly looks like in practice. He said he wanted to use a specific incident from his own recent experience as the primary case study. The program director said yes. The session was 45 minutes, delivered in a breakout room that held 60 people and had, by the time Marcus began speaking, people standing along the back wall. He told the story without embellishing it. He told it in the order it happened. He told what he saw, what he concluded, what he did, what happened next, and what he sat with afterward. He did not name the person involved. He said only that the person's name, when he heard it, was one he recognized, and that the moment of recognition had clarified something for him that he needed to clarify. He said, "The assumption I made was not about malice. I want to be clear about that. I was not trying to exclude someone. I thought I was doing my job correctly. That is the part that stayed with me. Because if I was wrong in that case, if I was making a calculation based on factors that had nothing to do with access or safety, then the question I have to ask is what other cases I have been wrong in the same way, and those people did not have a name that anyone in the room could say." He paused. He said, "We are the people who decide who gets to stand where. That is real power. Real power requires real scrutiny, not just of the people we are assessing, of the tools we are using to assess them." Someone in the back of the room started clapping. It moved forward. Marcus Webb stood at the front of the room and nodded, once without smiling. Not because he was not moved, because the work was not finished. He gave the same session the following year, and the year after that. By the third year, it had been incorporated into the association's standard certification curriculum, a 20-minute module on assumption and access, built around a de-identified case study from a November evening on the 31st floor of a building on Avenue of the Stars. Claire, the assistant who had entered the name on the list on a Tuesday afternoon, left the production company 18 months later and moved into event coordination on her own. She built a protocol for the events she ran that included, as a standing requirement, a pre-event briefing between herself and any on-site security team. 15 minutes, the list reviewed together. Names and faces matched where possible. Questions asked before anyone stepped off an elevator. She had been in the lobby that evening, arrived early to check the setup, and she had watched Marcus Webb put his hand on a collar and watched the room go silent. She had thought about it for a long time before she built the protocol into her practice. She named it, in her internal documentation, the verification standard. She did not say why she had named it that. But she knew, and it was enough. Keanu Reeves spent 2.5 hours at the event on the 31st floor. He spoke with several of the principals from the production company whose invitation had brought him there. He had a glass of water and declined the catering twice, politely both times. He left at 9:20. He took the elevator down alone. In the lobby, he paused at the security desk on his way out and signed out, the way the building required. The guard at the desk looked at his signature and looked at him and said, without quite knowing why he was saying it, that he hoped the evening had been good. He said, "It was. Thank you." He held the door for a woman entering with her hands full of files, the way he always holds doors for people, without calculation and without waiting to see if anyone notices. Then he stepped out into the November evening and walked to where he had parked. He was not thinking about the elevator bank or the man with his hand on his collar or the lobby full of people who had gone quiet. He was thinking about the conversation he had just finished on the 31st floor and a project that was beginning to take shape and the particular quality of an idea that has finally found its form. He drove home. The story continued without him. It always does. I have thought about what to say at the end of this one, more than I have thought about it at the end of any other story on this channel. Not because of what Marcus Webb did. Not the hand on the collar, that is the part that is easiest to have a clear feeling about. Because of what he did afterward. He did not have to give that presentation. He did not have to tell the story in front of 60 people, or 160, or any people. He could have filed the incident away as a mistake he had learned from privately, and moved on. Most people do exactly that. Most people learn in the dark, where no one has to see them doing it. He chose to learn in public, to make the mistake useful to people he would never meet, in situations that hadn't happened yet. To take the thing he had gotten wrong and turn it into something that might help someone else get it right. That is not what I expected from this story when I first heard it. I'm not sure what I expected. Probably something more comfortable, a simpler arc. The mistake, the consequence, the apology, the end. That arc exists. But the part that stays with me is the part that came after it. In a car in a driveway in Inglewood, and then in a breakout room in the following spring, and then in a protocol document named for a standard that a woman built out of a single evening she had not been able to forget. I think that is what this story is actually about. Not the mistake, what you do with it, after you have stopped flinching from it. I don't know if I would have done what Marcus Webb did. I hope I would have. But hope is the easy part. The hard part is the car in the driveway. This story is fictional, inspired by Keanu Reeves' well-known grace under pressure and the dignity he extends to everyone he encounters, regardless of how they have first treated him. Drop a comment and tell me what stayed with you longest, the moment you keep going back to. Share this with someone who might need to hear it today. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. See you in the next one.